As emergency responders rushed into Sutherland Springs, Texas, following the state's deadliest shooting, two men were headed in the opposite direction. They're actually chasing after the suspected shooter. I'm calling these guys heroes. Two locals took on the man who authorities say shot and killed 26 people at the First Baptist Church on Sunday morning as the suspect was trying to flee the scene. Here to discuss this is Dr. Alex Del Carmen. He heads up the School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, and Strategic Studies at Tarleton State University in Fort Worth, Texas. Dr. Del Carmen, welcome back to Trending Today USA. How are you today?
Good. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad you're here. I'm sorry about this happening in your state, and it's such a tragic situation. But at least there was someone there to confront the shooter. You think that changed the course of events?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question, right? So the bad guy comes out with an AR-15, and he's fully loaded. He's got more ammunition in his car, and he encounters two Texans that are, ready to take matters into their own hands and stop the threat, and I think they did. I think, there's a lot of speculation going around today, but at the end of the day, there is no question that this guy, A, did not intend to die, and B, he also wanted to harm other people.
Yeah, he sure did. He was wearing body armor, wasn't he?
That's exactly right, which leads us to believe that he actually planned the incident. And like I said before, he wasn't planning to die yesterday. I mean, there's no question that he was in for a battle, and he was not going to take his own life or do anything of the sort. And he wanted to affect and kill as many people as he possibly could.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounded like he had a plan, but the plan did not seem to include that he might confront somebody with a firearm as well. Unfortunately, a neighbor saw what was going on and helped out the situation by showing up and shooting at this coward. That's what he is. But I'm sure he did not intend on that occurring. And then they went on this wild chase. And if these people hadn't chased him, we might have lost him. We might not know who it was. He could have gotten away. So they really did save the day in that respect.
Yeah, there's no question, and like I said before, I mean, I'm fairly certain that authorities, as they're going through all his social media records, his computer, his cell phone, and whatnot, and perhaps even interviewing other people around him, I'm sure they're going to find out that this guy had other plans yesterday. In addition to killing people at the church, I'm sure that he had another destination or two to go and empty out all the clips that he had in his car. He didn't take all of them inside the church, so we do know that he had a second or a third plan ahead, and these two heroes were able to stop him in his tracks.
Yeah, they sure did. I'm so grateful for them. I don't know. Is there anything we can do to prevent these situations? Do you have a few ideas you could throw about?
It's really hard, and I know there's been a lot of discussion, as in your show, about, mental illness and what can we do to, curtail the weaponry access to folks that have mental illness. Look, at the end of the day, when you have people with bad motives, whether you cut back on their access to weapons or whatnot, there's a way to harm us. And the question really is, as a society, what are we doing? What are the expectations, the reasonable expectations that people should have in terms of safety? And what are we willing to give up in terms of freedoms in order to be able to have those safety nets ahead for us? And so if we want to hire police officers or security guards at every single church every Sunday, then we need to be prepared to be able to see and undergo a process of security. And you're going to cut back on some of these incidents, but are we really ready to do that as a society? That's the question.
It's a valid question, Dr. Del Carmen, and it's one that I often ask. But, the churches I've attended, I always thought it'd be a good idea to have, and I've seen this, where they have people standing outside, and often they're in a capacity of being more like greeting you. You kind of, hey, good morning, welcome to church, that sort of thing. But also they're also keeping an eye on things, and just that alone, having the presence of people outside, whether they're armed or not, maybe we don't know that, but just a gunman, a coward like this, someone who wants to do that, they don't want any problems. And so if they see somebody out there, I think that would act as a deterrent. So I think churches, schools, a lot of places, I just think they need to have a more proactive program and just have people keeping an eye on things.
Yeah, in criminology, we actually call that the presence of capable guardians. And the idea is that you're going to have individuals that are going to monitor the access to and from a particular place. The problem is that if they're unarmed and if they have no experience on what to do, someone that comes in fully loaded with weaponry, they're just going to be the first people to get killed, as opposed to individuals that would take down the gunmen. So,
Yes.
so we have to be careful as to how we recommend it and in what context. But I think you're right. I think you're onto something there.
Yeah, no, and you make perfect sense about that. You're right. I don't want I don't want them to be the first people to be taken down and not looking for added exposure. But I think with some training, some common sense, and maybe some support from law enforcement, maybe some private security firms, I think people could learn how to be, say, more of a guardian or a deterrent to this sort of thing. It's just an idea I'm throwing around. I just hope that churches step up. There's a church that not too far from me that I've been to, but I don't go there because actually on the gate, on their sign to their parking lot, they actually say, leave your guns at home. I mean, they're saying we don't want guns here. And for their sake, I wish they'd take the signs down. That's because it just seems like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I was talking to someone earlier about that, and I think that one of the, I know there's a lot of, political controversy on gun control when it comes to these types of events, but one of the theories that I have is that, of course, this is speculation, but based on the fact that I'm a criminologist and I've done the studies on this, is that if you have somebody walking to a church that is fully armed, and you've got at least a couple of people inside that church that are licensed to carry a weapon and are given permission to carry a weapon inside that church, perhaps the carnage this morning would not have been as significant as what it is.
Yeah.
Because it stands to reason that someone, a bad guy does not want to face opposition when they come in and try to harm innocent people.
That's right. I mean, there aren't that many stories out there of gunmen coming into a place that's known to be armed. I mean, they're not going to come into, say, the club where all the cops hang out and rob them unless they're just complete idiots. But no one's going to go to a place that's going to offer resistance, like you're saying, Doctor. And so I think the thing is for people to keep it a guessing game. I don't know. Maybe this is a soft target. Maybe it's not. And so if someone looks at a place like a church or a school and thinks that, hey, I might get resistance, hopefully they'll act as a deterrent. But I don't see society going that way. Everyone's always calling for gun control like this. Even last week with what happened in New York, immediately people started calling for gun control, but he used a rental truck, and the logic isn't there. They're just looking for a reason to put more restrictions on firearms for law-abiding citizens. But as talking to the last caller, they said this guy actually bought these guns legitimately, even though I don't know if he should have had them, but he had bought them legitimately.
Yeah, and if he hadn't bought him legitimately, he would have found a way to get him anyway. I mean, people that have a motive, whether you restrict them from having access to guns or not, they're going to find a way to do it, right? At the end of the day, it's a matter of how do innocent people get protected from people like him. And keep in mind, too, that it's easy for us to put those capable guardians and security protocols in churches across the United States that reside in big cities, right, in urban settings. But a lot of these churches that are in rural settings where, this is the people that died in this church yesterday constitute from 3 to 4% of the entire population of this town.
Yeah.
And so if you think about it in terms proportionally, I mean, it's going to be really hard to do that in mainstream America that don't have access to some of the things that we have access to in big cities.
Yeah, that's a good point, too. Were there any clues that this guy was going to do this? Was there anything on social media that's been revealed?
Not so far, but I imagine that investigators, there are hundreds of people right now working on this case, and, at the federal, state, and local level. And I'll say something, as you know, I've worked with law enforcement for 20 years here in Texas. We have the best of the best here when the Texas Rangers get involved, and we've got the FBI involved. These folks are going to be incredibly methodically and disciplined in their response to find out exactly what happened. So I imagine in a few weeks, perhaps in a couple of months, we're going to know exactly what prompted this guy to do what he did.
Yes. But as far as we know, it didn't have anything to do with terrorism, did it?
I think they've ruled it out so far, but that doesn't mean that is ruled out completely. Investigators have to keep their mind open as far as what led this person to do what he did, but I'm certain that the FBI is looking at what sort of international connections he may have had. I'm sure they're going to have to rule out, if he was overseas somewhere when he was in the Air Force, where he went, who did he talk to, if some people in his family knew what sort of social media access he had. Primarily they're going to have to rule out the idea of terrorism, but it does take some time. But so far, the signs show that there is no terrorism involved.
Well, that's good. Sometimes they attach somebody to terrorism a little bit too quickly, I think. It's like, well, how'd you know that? So, and from what I've heard, I think this shooter had some disagreements, I think, with some relatives or his ex-in-laws. You might have heard something about that, and and I guess they attended this church, but I don't think they were at the church at the time. There's nothing that's been said about that.
Right. Yeah, and so far, what we know is that he had some sort of a relative connection to the church. He obviously knew the area well. I am certain that he may have been at that church or close by at some point prior to the incident. It shows, all the signs show that he had a great deal of familiarity with the area, and obviously he knew where to park, he knew where to have access to. So, and he also prepared for the attack. And so this is this is an individual that has been thinking about doing harm specifically at this church for some time.
Apparently he has. I cannot imagine what's going on in someone's mind in this situation just moments before they're going to do it. How they steel themselves and talk to themselves, yes, I'm going to do it. I just cannot imagine what was going on in their mind. I just can't get it. Most people have more common sense. Most people would be too scared. Most people know better than to do something so terrible. Most people don't think like this. But for someone to think like this, I'm just curious as to what was going on in his mind moments before he prepared to go do this. It's like, and it's too bad that somebody wasn't aware of it, couldn't help him, couldn't stop it. But what can be done? I mean, we're not mind readers, are we?
No, we're not. But what we do see is this person obviously was someone that began to escalate his level of violence. I mean, we know now that he had a record of, hitting his wife and his child. He was actually imprisoned as a result of that. He was dishonorably discharged from the Air Force. And so this is somebody that's already been, exposed to violence throughout his life. And then in addition to that, I imagine that mentally he already crossed that bridge in the context of what it was going to feel like in order to be able to go in there and shoot people. So it was a matter of execution on his end as opposed to, going through the planning stages in his head to figure out he was going to do it. He just basically already had, made a decision that this is how he was going to end up, making a difference in his mind, in letting people know how much he hated them and how much he was in control. At the end of the day, those are the characteristics of a killer.
Yes. We're speaking with Dr. Alex Del Carmen. He's a frequent guest here at Trending. He heads up a School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, and Strategic Studies at Tarleton State University in Fort Worth, Texas. He's taught anti-terrorism tactics with the police. He's worked with the police departments from coast to coast. And we're glad to have you here today, Dr. Del Carmen. Thanks for shedding some light on this topic. It's very disturbing, and I look forward to talking to you again. Thanks for joining me on Trending Today USA.
I'm Marlee McCormick in the WBAP newsroom. Was there a connection between the shooter and the congregation? The story at 8:30 on WBAP.
Dr. Alex Del Carmen joins us right now, the executive director at School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, and Strategic Studies at Tarleton State. We always like to bring Dr. Del Carmen in, and how I say we ask him the same question that we've asked the other experts this morning, and that is, Dr. Del Carmen, could this have been avoided?
Good morning, and thanks for having me this morning. It's hard to say. I mean, at the end of the day, we do know so far that this individual had a record of violence. We do know that he was dishonorably discharged. We also know that he served time in a military prison. But having said that, I mean, those are not precursors to walking into a church on a Sunday morning and killing innocent people. So at the end of the day, it's hard to say whether or not we could have predicted it. What we do know is that this person had a history of violence.
A history of violence that apparently didn't show up on a background check, which is kind of odd, based on what we are learning right now. Any sort of domestic abuse generally would kick you out of the system as far as a background check is concerned to purchase a gun, would it not?
It would, but at the same time, keep in mind, too, that military records are different from civilian records in the sense that when you do run a background check, sometimes those two entities or softwares don't speak to one another. So I can see how that could have happened, but at the same time, obviously, there's a failure at some point in the system insofar as the fact that they should have been able to pick that up, and one would assume that they talk to one another.
If it's not too personal, what do you tell family and friends? Get a license and carry? How do you feel personally about it? And you don't have to answer if you want to. Yeah.
No. I mean, obviously, it's just a tragedy. I mean, at the end of the day, I say to people all the time, there are thousands of churches that got together yesterday and had, sermons and that they were heard by thousands of people across the United States. And for the most part, we can't assume that this is not going to happen to us in our daily routine, but it does happen. It's a reality that we have to live with in America today. So it has to do with our level of comfort. On my personal, life, I do carry. I have a CHL, and my family members, do as well, because you just never know when something like this is going to happen. But sadly, it's a reality that we have to live with every day of our lives.
Dr. Alex Del Carmen is with us from Tarleton State. We're going to check traffic real quick, come back with him after we hear from Laura Houston right now.
We've got those delays. The westbound I-20 has been a nightmare, still is, as you approach the Carrier Parkway area. That overturned 18-wheeler's been uprighted. Only the left lanes are getting through, but still hour and a half delay there. So 303, it's overloaded, so is Camp Wisdom, but those are your alternate routes. Northbound I-45 at Lamar, couple the right lanes are still blocked off. You still have the problem westbound I-30 at Grand Avenue. That was in the right lane. That was backing up towards Motley. The delays continue southbound on the tollway. It's still heavy there, south of 121 as you move down into Addison. And the problem on eastbound 635 at Skillman. That's in the right lanes. Covering Tarrant and Denton counties, here's Monty Cook.
I-20 eastbound at Hewlin, 3 right lanes now taken away because of that crash. It's quickly backing up behind it. This report is sponsored by Renaissance Dental, searching for a smarter way to offer dental, vision, life, and disability insurance. Renaissance makes it easier with nationwide network access, unparalleled customer service, and phenomenal claims processing. Contact your broker or visit renaissancefamily.com to discover more. For WBAP Right Now Traffic Watch, I'm Monty Cook.
WBAP weather, partly to mostly cloudy and mild with a frontal boundary stalled across the area. High today about 77, low tonight 59. We're going to stay kind of gray and cloudy tomorrow with a high of 65. And then some light rain can start moving in. It's not a big storm system. It's just some instability and a little bit of moisture. And we're looking at the cloudy, rainy, cool weather most of the day Wednesday, clearing out Thursday and Friday. Right now at WBAP, 74 degrees.
Dr. Alex Del Carmen joins us right now, the Executive Director of the School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, and Strategic Studies at Tarleton State University. We have talked all morning long, Dr. Del Carmen, about the see something, say something. And that can be so difficult. Hal had some quotes from some of his friends on social media who said, I had to ban him, I had to drop him, I had to unfollow him because he had gotten so crazy. Is that enough to warrant going to officials with, though?
We have the Constitution in the United States, right? So at the end of the day, we are constrained legally from being able to put people away or sending them off to a mandatory clinical assessment just because they look weird to most of the population. Unfortunately, we do have those provisions. Unfortunately, for the rest of us, we do as well, right? So it depends on which way you look at it, but there's only so much law enforcement, and from a legal perspective, there's only so much we can do about someone that may not be, quote unquote, normal or may not appear normal to the rest of their friends. But at the same time, obviously, we have to have something better in place in order to be able to prevent these attacks from taking place in the future. But, it's just hard to do that when you have social media as a recourse, and on top of that, we have the protections given to us by the Constitution.
When you think about it, too, though, I guess that's the simple answer is you turn it into officials, let them do their job, and if they do find that there's something wrong with him, then he's taken out of the system or taken out of the population. But if he's not, I guess there's no really recourse for them. If Hal turns me in, there's nothing that's going to happen to Hal for that, right?
Well, right. And then when you say turn it over to officials, what officials are going to actually grab such a case and process it?
Right.
You've got a criminal justice system that is saturated with cases that, DAs that have a lot going on and a great deal of cases to process. Law enforcement that is, we are short-staffed in most law enforcement entities throughout the United States. So when we refer such a case, what do you think is going to happen to something like that when it's being processed through the system? When you've got real bad people that need to be put away in prison for a long time that are going to be a priority. So it's really hard to do in a real life application on a daily basis, right?
All right, Dr. Alex Del Carmen, Tarleton State. Always appreciate the time and the insight.
7:17 now at KLIF. We still don't know what prompted the gunman in yesterday's church shooting to open fire on a congregation in South Texas. But investigators are now on scene looking at every piece of evidence. Joining us to talk about this is Dr. Alex Del Carmen, who heads up the Criminology Department at Tarleton State University. Good morning, Dr. Carmen.
Good morning.
One man
with no known connection to the church. Maybe he had some relatives who went there. We don't really know. What could possibly point toward a motive?
It's hard to say right now. I'm sure that investigators are piecing this together, and it's going to be perhaps weeks or even months before we actually know exactly what made this person do what he did. My understanding as of this morning is that he's had a history of violence. He was, discharged dishonorably from the military, and so it's not a surprise at all that an escalation of violence would take place in a human being such as him.
Aside from the terrible craving that we have to try to understand something like this, what's the point in even finding a motive?
Well, I think it's human nature for us to be able to figure out, what would lead somebody to do such a monstrous act and be able to take away innocent lives. I mean, when you look at the age of the youngest victim, 5 years old, and the fact that this was done at a church, most of us go to a church on Sunday and we never even think or assume that something bad's going to happen to us. It's the one place that we feel we're immune from the, in many ways from the harms of others, and so it touches the nerve of the American psyche, and particularly us in Texas, that, we're a very close knitted community. We're proud of being Texans, and this does not represent our great state.
I would imagine authorities will be scouring his social media pages. From what we hear, he posted a picture of himself carrying an automatic rifle on his Facebook page.
Right. So, I'm sure that the social media component is going to be a big component for law enforcement to be able to piece it all together, right? At the end of the day, people like this individual, and we've seen this acts in other places as well, not only in the United States, but throughout the world, they're really proud of what they're about to do. They want to leave a signature behind. They want to let others know why they're doing what they're doing. And so they begin to post cues and clues as to what they're about to do. And social media is a great tool for investigators to be able to identify those sources.
Yeah, we also hear that he came into that church carrying that semi-automatic rifle and wearing tactical gear. So, immediately your mind goes to, oh, here's a guy who thought he was a big shot or wanted to be one, and he was going to do some sort of military combat inside that church or something. I would guess that would give investigators other avenues to pursue in trying to find out more about him.
Right, and so from a criminological perspective, what that shows us is the fact that he was actually planning the event because obviously he took the time to be able to load up, to have enough ammo, to be able to protect his own body. So the other side of that is that he wasn't planning on dying. He left, a vehicle across the street from what we understand up to now, and he was going to use it in order to flee from the scene. So this is not a suicidal individual. This is somebody that intends to carry out a massacre at a church and perhaps go out and harm others. And so there may have been a stage 2 or 3 of this attack, which now we know that thanks to a neighbor that was around, he was able to perhaps deter him from doing further harm to others.
I know you got to go, but we do thank you for your time this morning, Dr. Alex Del Carmen, Criminology Department at Tarleton State.
This question always surfaces: can these types of attacks be prevented? If not, what else can be done? Insight now from Dr. Alex Del Carmen, who heads up the School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, and Strategic Studies at Tarleton State University in Fort Worth, Texas. Alex, can these types of shootings be prevented?
It's very hard to do that. I mean, especially in a small town where, the most that happens is that, somebody gets drunk and they may end up arresting him or her over the weekend. And then you've got a bad guy that basically parks his car at a gas station, walks across the gas station with a rifle, and begins to assault that innocent people that are doing nothing more than getting together on a Sunday to pray. I mean, this is as horrific as it comes, and it is incredibly unpredictable. I mean, how can you, for law enforcement, how can they be at every possible instance where bad guys are going to attack innocent people? So, it's an impossibility.
Boy, oh boy. The best you can do, I guess, is figure out how best to respond. I mean, is that what we're left with, a reactionary mode?
That's exactly right, and that's what I was going to say next, which is the fact that at this point, what we have left to do is essentially, when this happens and that first 911 call comes in, what do you do in order to address it? How do you identify the suspect? Where do you go? What kind of connections does this person have with, or not, with outside sources? Who helped him out? Does he have an ideological component attached to this? Where did he receive military training, if any? And so those are the questions that law enforcement, I really train them to kind of think through in the process of something like this, so that we can then hopefully know more about bad people and be able to prevent it at some point.
Is there something different in a law or regulation that could prevent something like this? I understand the argument that killers don't follow gun laws. I get that. Is there something different that could be done?
I heard, as soon as the event took place, of course, all sorts of social media, components began to emerge. But, we heard the governor of Texas that basically said that began to describe the sequence of events. And one of the things that he said was, and I don't know that people are paying attention to this part, which is when the bad guy is walking out of the church with his rifle in his hand, there was a citizen with a rifle at hand that began to shoot at the bad guy. And so we don't know at this point whether the suspect actually died as a result of a wound created or caused by the citizen, or in fact if he committed suicide. But what we do know is that there was a hero at as this bad guy was exiting the church, that actually took it upon himself to defend the area and perhaps other innocent lives from dying. So the argument could be made that although some people I know are quick to point fingers and say, let's reduce guns, let's do this, let's do that, had we, negated the ability for this law-abiding citizen to have a weapon, perhaps this could have been worse than what it was, as horrific as it was.
We're speaking with Dr. Alex Del Carmen. He heads up the School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, and Strategic Studies at Tarleton State University in Fort Worth, Texas. We're talking about the church shooting in South Texas. This is slightly off subject, but I'm talking out loud. Do you think that we need a speech from, say, the president, some powerful leader to address this and say enough is enough? Would that matter? You must deal with leadership in some of these programs you put together.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious. It obviously matters, but what matters more than a speech is the actions that come behind it. I mean, when things like these happen, all across the United States, people rally behind law enforcement, as they should, and they support our local law enforcement community. But at the end of the day, the everyday police officer feels isolated. They feel like they're not liked. They're not engaged by the community anymore. And so it would be nice to have some acknowledgement, throughout the country about the fact that law enforcement continue to put their lives on the line. They continue to protect innocent people, and they continue to try to prevent these attacks from taking place. And as I've said before in the show, the bad guys, they only need to get it right one time out of 10 or 15 attempts.
Yeah.
But for law enforcement, they have to get it right all the time.
Thanks, Alex. Dr. Alex Del Carmen from the School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, and Strategic Studies at Tarleton State University.
Good stuff.
Joining us right now on the KTAR Newsmaker line is Dr. Alex Del Carmen. And the reason why we want to speak to Dr. Del Carmen is not only is he the head of the School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, and Strategic Studies at Tarleton State University outside Fort Worth, Texas, but he's also part of Lionheart International Service Group. This is a group that teaches professional security training, consulting, as well as services. Dr. Del Carmen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
The one area that I really want to focus on most with you, because to be honest, sir, I was surprised that this was even available.
That's like a thing.
Is how to teach churches about security. This is in light of what we witnessed happened in your state right there in Texas. You actually work with churches to go over security. What does that even look like?
Well, as a criminologist, I don't work directly with churches, but I can tell you that as a criminologist, one of the things that I do is I frequently give advice and assess individuals or entities that want to engage in a security protocol to keep their people safe. And so you got to remember, too, that when you look at some of these online sources that actually provide security advice to churches and whatnot, they're actually providing general parameters. They're not going to go into specifics as to exactly what they need to do so that the bad guys actually learn from it and are able to overcome that when they perpetrate a church. So for the most part, they're going to have general components, and the actual assessment is done once the assessor meets the client, so to speak.
We're talking to Dr. Alex Del Carmen, again, head of the School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, and Strategic Studies at Tarleton State University in Texas. A church appears to be, in some cases, about as soft a target as you can get. Are we seeing kind of, I don't know if I have the analogy right, water finding its own level? As more barriers are put in place, as more security goes in place at different areas, are these criminals just finding the place that people aren't? Security is not at?
Well, right. So keep in mind, this is 30 miles outside of San Antonio in a rural setting where people from the town, 4% of the town's population was inside that church.
Wow. And
so put it in perspective in the sense that you have a bad guy showing up where 4% of the town is there, and at least half of the people in the church died. Wow. And so from his perspective, he's looking at soft targets and people that he's going to inflict the most amount of damage, make the most significant impact, and do so in the heartland of the state of Texas. So today we talk about, if it happened there, it can happen anywhere in the United States. And that's exactly what he wanted us to talk about.
We are speaking to Dr. Del Carmen, and Doctor, I want to apologize. I realize that you're not affiliated with Lionheart. That is our next guest coming up. But you are the head of criminology and justice at Tarleton State University there. And I want to get your thoughts on the argument that so many are making nowadays that, look, it was a good guy with a gun that stopped a bad guy with a gun. Are more guns helpful?
It depends, right? So you can't have just a yes or no answer to that. More guns in the hands of the right people is obviously helpful. You have to remember that if we start, and I know that people begin the day after, yesterday, we begin to talk about whether or not we should control guns and whatnot. But I got to tell you, my feeling on this is perhaps may shock some of your audience in the sense that I don't believe that gun control is the way to go. I really believe that what we need to start thinking about is how do we allow good people have access to guns and train them to defend themselves. Arguably, if you would have had somebody inside that church with a couple of guns that would have known how to use it, maybe the carnage wouldn't have been as significant as it was today. And thank God for the two people that were outside the church that actually fought this man with gun power. Mm-hmm. And as soon as he did, he dropped the gun, panicked, and left, right?
But my question is also following maybe a less higher of a profile story. Walmart, the shooting that happened in Denver there last week, 3 people lost their lives. And the Thornton, Colorado Police Department said that these well-intentioned gun carriers, there were people that actually pulled out their guns. They didn't fire within the Walmart, but
multiple people.
They pulled them out, and they set the stage for a lot of chaos, and it actually stalled efforts to capture the suspect because they had to keep going back through this surveillance video to figure out, well, who was the bad guy with the gun and who were the good guys with the gun. So can that also create chaos in a situation such as what happened in Denver?
Absolutely, and that's why I use the word, and I included in my statement the word training, right? Because you can't just give a gun to somebody, have them take 100-question multiple choice test, put a blank, 5 meters away, and then for the person to say, okay, you qualify now, you have a CHL, have a good day, right? So people oftentimes, carry a gun to feel protected, but they don't necessarily know how to use it. So the idea is to be able to train people to use it that feel comfortable with it and that have made a mental and emotional decision that when a bad person shows up with a gun, they're going to take that gun out and use it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an important part there. Thank you so much.
Dr. Del Carmen, we appreciate your time today.